now in this part of the demo, we're going to talk about how to set teeth. Okay? So after checking the quality of our work, we will find that we have 3 clasps attached to our cast and ready to do the work. They have all of the features there. Okay? So we are going to select teeth to set this partial denture later on. In our temporary acrylic RPD, we usually use acrylic teeth. So these are the same teeth we have used for dentures. Okay? They come in different shades, sizes, and shapes. Multiple shades, sizes, and shapes. And when we want to select the teeth, it's much easier for us from complete denture, because in complete denture we don't have a guide usually in front of us. Rarely do we have a photo of the patient or a previous cast or his old teeth there on a cast. This is rarely. But in the case today, we have the teeth already there. So the patient does have teeth in his mouth. And these teeth will give us a guide on how to select the teeth that we're going to choose. Okay? First of all, so when we are using our casts and during the examination of the patient, we need to select the shade and the shape of the teeth. Okay? So the shade, we usually take it with what we call a shade guide, which has multiple shades on it. And we select the shape or the form of the teeth. We can use the cast itself for that. For example, this form, do we consider it tapered, square, oval? What do you consider this type of teeth in terms of overall shape? This teeth. And how do I know the shape, by the way? If I run 2 lines, one on the mesial surface and one on the distal surface, and then a line joining here, it will tell me what type of this tooth is. So look at the lines. The mesial outline is like this. The distal outline is almost like this. So I would call this tapered. Okay? It's called square when they are both parallel. Almost most of the distance is parallel teeth, and then we have a wide neck for the teeth. We call these square teeth. If we have small teeth, a bit tapered, but also with round ends on the edges, we call this oval teeth. Okay? So we take the general form of the teeth from the teeth that we have. For example, if this central is missing, simply I choose another central that has the same shape. It will tell me. If both centrals are missing, the lateral sometimes, many times, holds the same shape of the central, but in smaller size and distal inclination. But the shape itself is usually the same, but in a smaller size and in a different inclination. So this also can give me an indication. Remaining teeth. So we selected the material. We said it's acrylic for temporary RPDs. We selected the shade. We take it from inside the patient's mouth using a shade guide. And with the shade guide, we use to put the tooth exactly in its place. For example, if I'm looking for a premolar shade, I have to put the shade guide with the tooth in, with the tab of the tooth in the correct location, because if I put it here, it will appear lighter. If I put it inside the cheek, in the dark area of the mouth, it will appear a bit darker. So when we compare teeth with natural teeth, we should put the tooth tab exactly in the place where the missing tooth is. Okay? So this is how we select the shade. The form, we take it from the cast or from the patient's mouth. We can do it both ways. But the shade, for example, I could not take it from the patient, the cast, because cast is made out of stone with different colors. Then we are left with size. When we want to replace teeth, the best RPD or temporary RPD occurs when I set the teeth have all the same dimensions of all teeth. That means when I put teeth in, okay, suppose I'm putting this set of teeth. I'm going to put the teeth in. When I want to put the teeth in, I need to select a size where after adding all teeth, I have exactly the same size of the bounded saddle. Okay? So the net result of the mesial distal width of these teeth should be equal to the bounded saddle area. If 1 millimeter is in between is missing, I could simply trim slightly from here, very slightly from here, of all teeth, mesial and distal of all teeth, and fit them in. Okay? Within 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter, I could distribute the reduction amongst the teeth themselves. For example, in this case, it's a bit crowded. I'm trying to put the teeth in location, but it's a bit crowded. I could come with my trimmer, with my acrylic bare, and trim just finely the surface here and the surface mesial distal of each tooth, and it will fit. So a discrepancy of 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter, it's okay. Okay, you can simply distribute extra space or extra dimensions in between the teeth. So this is okay. The other situation is when you have smaller teeth. So suppose that I'm coming in with a size, but when I place it, I'm going to choose this one, for example. Okay. This is the lower cast, and I want to fit in these teeth in place. I'm going to go for the bounded saddle area, and I try to fit in these teeth, and I find that, suppose I'm using this size, and I find space. Okay? Suppose I'm using this size and I find the space. Now, an ideal situation where I'm in a lab and the dental technician is choosing the teeth, they should choose the size that they have. Okay? And they should have multiple sizes for multiple teeth. Okay? So we want to make sure that the size is correct. So we don't choose small teeth like this. Okay? But suppose the discrepancy is only 1 millimeter. Yani the difference between the length of the teeth, mesial distally, and the length of the bounded saddle is only 1 millimeter. Within 1 to 2 millimeters, it's okay. Okay? But then when I want to fit the teeth, I fit the artificial tooth. When I want to fit teeth together, I fit the artificial tooth touching the natural tooth. So the tooth on the cast represents the natural one, so yes? And this acrylic tooth is representing the artificial tooth. So I choose that the contact between the RPD and the natural tooth is tooth-to-tooth contact. No acryl in between, okay? And the spaces, the extra spaces that I might have in between the teeth, I leave them to be covered by wax. So I leave the spaces for the inside, and I put tooth-to-tooth contact on the other side. Let's try to draw it to give you a clearer view of the case. So suppose I have a premolar here. Okay. And I have, this one is a canine. I'm going to do a premolar. Okay. And then I have this empty space, and then I have a molar. So the best or ideal situation is to choose a tooth that fits exactly the empty space that we have here. Okay? If we don't have this case, for example, I'm replacing also the molar in this case, and I have tooth number 7 here. I'm going to make it a bit lighter. So this is the replaced tooth. And I have tooth number 7 like here. Okay? So I have a space here between. This is tooth number 7. So this is tooth number 7. I'm trying to fit in a premolar and a molar. And the only size that the lab has 1 to 2 millimeters distance between the artificial tooth and the natural tooth. We prefer that if it's the only size, and we are obliged to use this tooth form, because otherwise the teeth will be too large. This was natural spacing in the patient's mouth, for example. Okay? Otherwise, we're going to use the teeth that are very much larger, and this will change the buccal shape of the teeth, because the buccal size of the teeth should be also similar to the natural tooth. So what do we have? We have a space here. So we don't leave the space between the tooth, the artificial tooth, and the natural tooth. I should set this 6 close to the 7, which is the natural 7 here. Okay? and set this premolar close to the premolar and leave the extra space in the middle. Okay? So tooth to tooth contact. This is the ideal situation when you set teeth. And also regarding the size of the teeth, remember that also I'm using the gingival occlusal dimension of the cast as also a guide. So if I'm looking at this cast, for example, notice that the distance between the gingiva and the occlusal table is large. I cannot use the following tooth to replace this. Okay. Suppose I'm putting another tooth here. Do you see this? Occlusogingivally, this tooth is short. Okay? So I need to make sure that also my tooth from occlusal till gingival end is the same. Sometimes we are tight in terms of the location we're going to place the teeth, and some of the tightness comes from the saddle area, so we need to trim teeth in some cases. Meaning that mesodistally it's okay, the teeth fit, or with the space in between teeth, but I'm left that occlusally, that when I put the tooth is high. Suppose I'm using this one, and I'm putting the tooth and it's hitting the opposing tooth. In this case, we need to trim the teeth because it's high. And how do we trim it? We trim it from the lingual side, and we keep it trimming in a shell shape. So if I'm looking at this image now, if you can notice this drawing here, okay? Suppose that the tooth is like this. This is the buccal, this is the lingual. And then you know that acrylic teeth come in this shape, with a neck and then bulge. So this is how the teeth come from the manufacturer. Okay? So I'm trying to fit in this tooth, and I find it's high. It's hitting the opposing arch, and I need to trim. So how do I trim from the tooth? I keep it trimming in a manner where I try to preserve the occlusal gingival dimension. So if I'm looking at this tooth, I try to preserve this buccal form of the tooth, because preserving this will keep the morphology of the tooth when seen from the buccal, and this is the one that you see when the patient smiles. Okay? So when I want to trim, I usually go into the lingual side and trim, and no matter how much I trim, if I need this much of trimming, I preserve the buccal surface. And this happened with you in the dentures. If you remember, some of you came and trimmed the tooth like this, horizontally. What happens if you trim the tooth horizontally? The tooth is no longer aesthetic from the buccal side, and this is appearing to the patient. Okay? So no matter how much we trim, we begin from the fitting surface. And even before that, even before trimming from the fitting surface, we go and remove wax. Remember that the tooth is embedded in wax. So we begin by removing wax, number one. We trim slightly from the acrylic base if we have an acrylic base. Okay? And then we trim from the tooth as a last resort if the tooth is still high. So this is the sequence we follow. Okay. So we want to set teeth. We need to select their size. We need to select their form. And we need to use the opposing arch. Why do we need to use the opposing arch? Because of the occlusal table. Excellent. So remember that we have selected the mesial distal width, okay? So we selected the shape of the tooth. We selected the form of the tooth buccally. We now know the gingival, occlusal height of the tooth. But sometimes, even when we finish selecting everything, and I want to set the teeth according to this cast, remember that we have an opposing arch. So if this is missing, suppose this is missing, in this case, try to hold it in place. Okay. So suppose this area is missing, and I want to put teeth. I need to know where is the occlusal level of the teeth. And this has many cases. The first case scenario is that we have an opposing occlusal table, and it's uniform. The teeth are still in line with the occlusal table. In this case, simply set the teeth according to the opposing. We put the functional cusp in its location. The upper palatal in the central fossa of the lower. The lower buccal is in the central fossa of the upper. The overjet goes buccally. Okay? So simply, if we have a good opposing occlusion, we simply follow the occlusion of the lower. And this is a bounded saddle. So how do I know that this is a bounded saddle in terms of occlusion? I have a contact here and a contact here between the natural teeth. So if this was the natural case in the patient's mouth, I have a contact between this tooth and this tooth and this tooth and this tooth. When I finish setting, the contact should still be there. It should not go with a space. If I have a space, that means my setting of the teeth was high and it altered the occlusion. We don't want this. So the first case scenario is a bounded saddle with the opposing arch, with the occlusal stops mesial and distal to the saddle area. We have occlusal stops are there. And we have the lower occlusal table uniform. So we simply set according to the lower. It will help us and guide us. The other case scenario, bounded saddle, but the lower occlusal table is not uniform. Maybe this tooth is over-erupted. Okay, an over-erupted tooth. If this was a definitive RPD, we might do crowning for an over-erupted tooth or change the shape or morphology. But because we're using now temporary RPD, if the discrepancy is not too large, I can use the same occlusal table, even if the tooth is a bit high from the lower side or opposing side. And we just make sure that when the patient moves sideways, this high tooth is not hitting with the tooth or causing premature contact. We check the occlusion very well inside the patient's mouth. If it's a large discrepancy, maybe this lower tooth is touching the upper. These are cases where we have a large discrepancy. We usually go and check the lower in terms of vitality, periodontal health, and so on. And if the tooth is mobile or has a huge lesion and so on, I could consider even extraction if I don't have place. And usually those types of extreme decisions like extraction of a tooth, an opposing tooth, we usually do it in definitive treatments. So if I have a minor discrepancy, I can set over it. Moderate, I can set over it or use what we call a splint, occlusal splint. I haven't told you about that. But we call them treatment or therapeutic ways where we have the RPD causing intrusion of the tooth. We design it in a way to cause intrusion of that tooth. But if the tooth is not healthy, we might even consider extraction of the over-erupted tooth. Okay. Now, so it's easy in the bounded. Usually, the rule goes for temporary RPD. We follow the occlusion that we have. Bounded, and we have an opposing occlusion. Okay, the other case scenario is the free-end saddle. What do we do in a case of a free-end saddle opposed with occlusion? Here we use the cast articulation, and we can simply put it on the articulator. But in this side, look how the casts are not stable when we have free-end saddles. Casts begin to move. Okay? This is not stable. I could set the teeth like this or like this or like this. I'm not sure how I should set the teeth. So in cases where we have free-end saddle, we should have a step that we call jaw registration. So this is the case when we need the visit. I told you in RPD we have the range from 2 visits up to the full 5 visits. Okay? What visits are we omitting? We're omitting jaw registration step and omitting a try-in. These usually, if only bounded saddles are there, we have enough occlusion, we have enough stable occlusion, and we can satisfy with only taking impressions of the upper and lower, mount the casts using a bite, and simply go for setting the teeth. But once free-end saddles come in, this is what happens. Even when I'm trying to set it on the cast, these are not stable, they are mobile. Okay, this mobility causes this occlusion not to be stable. So I need to place inside the patient's mouth. I will call him for a visit, we call a try-in visit. Okay, sorry, jaw registration first. And we have made him a base plate with a wax rim, a partial base plate with wax rims there. And we let the patient bite on the wax, and then the wax comes, we put it on the cast, and we mount this according to the wax registration. We will see it in further detail when we go to the lecture. You will see it with images, okay? So we need, when we have free-end saddles, we have to do the jaw registration. But the jaw registration is simply we let the patient bite on what he has, because here we have a free-end saddle, and here we have teeth, okay? And this occlusal table is regular and uniform. So simply the jaw registration step, do you remember we told you that in our complete denture we have 12 steps that we should record, so? We have the midline, canine line, smile line, visibility, buccal corridor, canine fullness, labial fullness, the parallelism, both parallelism, anterior and horizontal parallelism. So many points of registration, okay? But once we have a uniform occlusion and a free-end saddle, we need just to take the bite. And we don't need to go to the RCP because the patient has a stable occlusion and we can register it, and the patient always goes back to this occlusion because the teeth are always telling them to do that. So the teeth will guide the patient, and the prudential ligament memory will guide the patient always to this bite. So we don't need to register this in RCP, okay? So we omitted most of the steps of registration. We are left only just to take a bite. It's not called the centric bite because we're not in RCP, so? We call this a regular bite or a centric intercuspation, just intercuspation. We just let the patient bite on wax. I don't even need parallelism because I have the lower occlusal table regular. I don't need to use the Fox plane and record parallelism. But suppose we have the other case where we have two free-end saddles opposing to each other. In this case, for example, okay, I have an upper free-end saddle and have a lower free-end saddle. Okay, I can let the patient bite on his regular bite, which is guided by the teeth. This is okay, but I have a problem. Even when the patient is biting on his regular bite, how high do I make my wax on this area? Because I have a wax rim here and a wax rim here. Yes? I have two wax rims, one here and one here. But what is the inclination of my wax? Should I incline it like this or like this? Here I need to use the Fox plane. I put the Fox plane inside the patient's mouth according to the upper, and trim the upper wax to the Fox plane parallelism. I make sure the interpupillary line is correct, and I make sure that I'm flat with the Fox plane is regular with the face dimensions. Okay, so the Fox plane should be correct with the face. And once the upper is set to the occlusion on the other side, because the Fox plane will be recording the other side here. So once it's set, this wax is set, I set the lower wax according to the upper wax. Okay? I set the lower according to the upper. So this is an extra step added. We have another case. What if we have bilateral free-end saddles? Bilateral free-end saddles. We have both sides missing. If I have a stable anterior occlusion, I keep the occlusion as it is. I simply ask the patient to close in maximum intercuspation. And what we did here, I repeat it on the other side, which is Fox plane registration of the upper, parallel with the lines of the face, the external lines in the face, and then do the lower on them. Okay. But what if we don't have enough occlusion on the anterior teeth? I go back and register in RCP. If I don't have enough occlusion on the anterior, or if I have overclosure, or I have problems in the occlusal plane of the anterior teeth, I go and do a full jaw registration, meaning Fox plane registration and RCP registration in the correct vertical dimension. So we are using the whole range, depending on the number of the teeth remaining, the type of the saddle we are doing. The simplest way is doing a bounded saddle opposed with natural teeth with normal occlusion. Simply we ask the patient to take impressions, in this case, Suppose this is the only saddle area missing, simply we ask the patient to close on the wax. We close on a bite registration, rubber or wax. We'd simply take one impression and then go and do our dentures. If we have a free end saddle, I have to put in a visit we call jaw registration visit, and let the patient just bite on the wax block here. If we have two free end saddles, I add the Fox plane registration and the bite in the same occlusion or maximum intercuspation of the patient. If we have bilateral free end saddles, I check the anterior occlusion. If the anterior occlusion is okay, I do as one unilateral free end saddle. If the occlusion anterior is not okay, I go and register also with the Fox registration, Fox plane registration. I also register the RCP. Going back to denture registration, it's closer to denture registration. Okay, so this is the full range how we register the teeth. So now we are going to begin our work on the T-casts you have. And we're just going to revise the final point about how does a tooth contact the other tooth with the presence of a wire in between. Okay? How does a tooth contact a tooth with the wire in between? Because we have bended wires and we have the wire between two teeth. I'm going to try to use this model to represent teeth that want to come in contact with each other. Okay, I'm going to try to use this as a model. So naturally, these are circular, okay? But still they represent the idea we want to say. That teeth naturally have a maximum bulge. And the maximum bulge on the other tooth, this is the area where they usually come in contact in. Okay? This is what we call contact area. It's not a point contact. Between teeth, we usually have a flat area here and a semi-flat area here. It's around 2-3 millimeter wide, so teeth come in a flat area. It's not a point contact as these circles. These are actual circles. We only have point contact. But with teeth, we have an area. It's more like an area. So we have some flat parts of the tooth. But this is to show you the idea. Once the teeth come in such contact, we have embrasures, what we call embrasures. What is an embrasure? It's a space between two adjacent teeth. So it depends on the where we're looking at. We have an occlusal embrasure. See this empty triangle here? Because these are curved and these are curved, sir? And we have the same situation in the teeth. We call this occlusal embrasure. We also have another embrasure down here, and we call it a gingival embrasure. And this gingival embrasure is where the interdental papilla resides. Do you remember the interdental papilla? The part of the gingiva that goes like a zigzag in between teeth. So it fills in this space and then goes downwards, and fills another space and comes downwards. So this is the interdental papilla. So it's a papilla between two teeth, interdental, in between teeth. Okay? So we call this a gingival embrasure. We also have, if we look occlusally at the teeth, we have a buccal embrasure and a lingual embrasure. Okay? We also, suppose this is the buccal, we have this empty space, which is the buccal, and we have this empty space, which is the lingual. And we call this buccal and lingual embrasures. And remember that in our wire bending, we told you to end the wire in which embrasure? Buccally. We end the wire in the buccal embrasure between teeth. This is the best location for the wire to hide. Not touching the contact. The wire should not touch the contact. If you wire bend and it's touching, try at the very end, cut this last millimeter touching. It's a bit away from the contact exactly, but inside this embrasure, the buccal embrasure. Okay? So these are what we call embrasures. Okay, let's go back to the wire. Where should the wire be? First of all, remember that we have blocked this undercut. So if we have this tooth, this is the maximum bulge of the tooth, and this is the area away from the maximum bulge in the gingival direction. We call this an undercut. We have blocked this with a plaster. This is a natural tooth, and this is the artificial I'm coming back with. Okay? So a natural tooth, first we have blocked this area using plaster. When I wire bend, suppose this is my wire, my wire should be away from the undercut definitely, away from the blockage material that runs down vertically, and it's still inside the embrasure. Now I want to come with another tooth. Okay, try to fix it in location. I want to come with the other tooth in contact. So because this wire is away from the contact area, I still can come in contact with the tooth. I'm still inside the embrasure between the teeth. So the wire runs in the middle, not interfering with the other tooth contact with my artificial tooth, okay? My artificial and natural teeth still come in contact, although the wire is in between them. And this is what I need to make sure when I'm putting teeth onto the cast. So if I'm wire bending, I finish my wire bending, and I want to begin setting teeth. Okay. I want to come and put, before waxing up and before doing the other procedures, I want to come with the artificial tooth and try to contact it with the natural tooth. If this doesn't come in contact, I should bend the wire a bit lower. Okay, so this is my criteria for the wire bending, that I should not have a contact, the wire should not interfere with the contact of the natural and artificial tooth. So check your wire before you begin your work. This wire should go a bit downwards, not to interfere with this. Okay? If I find that my wire is almost okay, but still there's some interference, I am allowed to cut in a small groove in the artificial tooth to aid this contact. So I might cut in here a small groove using the bare and make sure that still the contact comes in contact and it avoids that tooth. So this is allowed without ruining the buccal shape of the tooth. So it doesn't appear buccally. It's only on the lingual side, proximal lingual side, where I can trim. But otherwise I should bend my wire away from this area. Okay? So this is the first point. So I went back to my wire, and I rebend it in a way, and now I should have no interference with the contact between the artificial and the natural tooth with the wire there. Okay? So I adjust my wire bending. Okay, suppose that my wires are okay. I checked that all wires are not interfering with the wire bending. And now I need to begin the steps of adding wax. Because remember that when we are setting teeth, we are adding wax in the form that we want acrylic to be in later on. Okay? So it's the same steps where we add wax in between the teeth as interdental papilla. We add wax on the palatal side. And we also make what we call a major connector in wax, meaning that it represents the, for example, and this is the upper case, we make the palatal coverage with the wax, making the outline. We will draw the outline in a moment. If we are going with the lower, and we are dealing with the lower, okay, we're going to do the wax up in a way where we are going to set the teeth. I'm going to add wax to set the teeth in place. I'm also going to add wax to the lingual areas where I'm going to make a major connector made out of acryl. And because acryl is a bit weak, if I'm going to use a lower denture made out of acryl, I should extend the acryl to the survey line on the lingual sides of teeth. Okay? And this was the question where somebody was asking, why do I cover with that blockout? Do you remember the plaster blockout? Why do I cover the lingual side of the tooth? Okay? So this is the answer. Because when I draw the survey line on the lingual, I find that there is a lingual undercut, correct? Okay. This lingual undercut, if the acrylic comes into it, and there is a lingual undercut here, and there is another lingual undercut here, they will let the acrylic in, and it's not easily taken out because acrylic is solid and the teeth are solid. So this engaging of these undercuts will first prevent the easy removal or the passive removal and insertion of the denture. The second reason is that it will traumatize the gingiva. And you will take it today in the lecture when we're talking about biomechanical and periodontal health or oral health with RPDs. The principles of RPD construction in terms temporary or definitive RPD. So if the acrylic comes in touch with this marginal gingiva are very delicate, and the acrylic is solid. And no matter how much we make it to stable as much as we like, but still there is some minor movement while the patient is using this RPD. When the patient is biting on the teeth, there is some minor movement. This minor movement will keep impinging and pushing the gingiva. And this will cause a trauma, and on the long term, what we call gingival recession. Recession meaning going down. The gingiva goes away from the trauma. So we don't want this harmful effect on the abutment teeth, so this is why we block this undercut. Actually, before the wax-off, we also block the other gingival margins if my major connector is going there. Okay? So let us talk about the extensions of major connector. My major connector should, first of all, for the banded saddle, rule is the following. For the banded saddle, wherever I have a clasp on a tooth, I should have part of the acryl lingually or palatally on this tooth. Why? Because that clasp, while going in and out, it's active. It's pushing the tooth. So I need something solid to back up the tooth, or otherwise, when the patient continues to use this clasp, this continuous push from the clasp will act as if it's an orthodontic device. It will move the tooth slowly. So the tooth could easily move. So I need something to oppose this movement. It's something solid. So we make it out of acryl here. In the metal cast metal, we make another retentive arm. You will see it, we call reciprocal arm, for example. So we need something solid lingually or palatally to a clasp area. In acrylic, we make it using acrylic. So in a banded saddle rule is that acrylic extends wherever we have a clasp. We should embrace the tooth from the other side using acryl. And this area should be blocked out. The other tooth, if we have a clasp, we should embrace it with acryl. Okay? This is the banded saddle area. For the free and saddle area, on the tooth side, once more, if I have a clasp, I should extend my acryl up to here. The area where we don't have a tooth, we follow the same rules of acrylic extension and complete denture. Is that we go downwards vertically on the buccal, we follow the movement of the tissue, border tissue, and simply we extend as much as possible as long as we are not traumatizing or advancing or going beyond the border areas. So our limit here is the border areas. Palatally, how much do I extend backwards? But we go back to complete denture. This follows that we are looking for a vibrating line. So if I'm extended on two teeth, on these two teeth, I follow I use the vibrating line as my posterior extension of the denture. If I'm using only one tooth, I come from this tooth and I go and carve it. But in this free and saddle area, I'm not going beyond the free vibrating line. Okay? So in free and saddle areas, we follow complete denture rules for extensions of dentures, the base of the dentures. So what are we left with? If I go to complete drawing this, if I want to complete the drawing this outline, I find that I'm going to go from here downwards, and I'm going up to here. I will go from besides the tooth vertically down. In the bounded area, I do not need to reach the full extension of the sulcus. I could come short like this, and this is enough for me. I don't need to go into the sulcus. Unless if I'm in the interior area and the patient has a gummy smile, I need to extend. Okay, the acryl. But in banded areas posteriorly, I do not need to go to the full extension on the cast, in the border area. This is an abutment with a clasp. I extend the acrylic up to here. This is a free and saddle area. On the S-tooth side, I follow the same rule. I go down vertically from here with a round angle. I round this out. And then on the saddle area, I follow the denture rules, which I do not go beyond border areas. So I do trimming inside the mouth. Remember that. And now these two lines, I join them together. This is my extension. Okay? This is for your cast. But suppose I have another extracted tooth here and I need to extend here. Suppose this tooth is not there. Okay? And I want to extend it to the canine. I find that the distance between the marginal gingiva here and the base of the acryl is less than 6 millimeters. I have to cover it all. I should not leave narrow spaces between the marginal gingiva and the acrylic border. We will talk about this today in the lecture in further detail. But for your design, we go, the ones you have, for the upper that you have, we go from one abutment to the other abutment, clearing out this area by more than 6 to 8 millimeters, okay? To clear this area to not make any plaque accumulation. So this is the extension of the base. The lower, the bounded saddle area, this tooth will have a clasp because it's an abutment. We go lingually and come down. This is a free and saddle area. I follow denture rows, so I go as much as possible posteriorly and as much as possible buccally to get support, and as much as possible lingually, governed by the border areas, and go back vertically to the tooth. So in this area, go back with a round angle and go back vertically to the tooth. This is the free and saddle area. The bounded saddle area, buccally, I go down from the abutment teeth. I don't need to go to the full length, and I end my base there. But lingually, it's another situation. I don't have the full palate to strengthen the acryl. The acryl will be very narrow in this area. It's small and narrow. This might expose it to fracture. So I need to extend my acrylic to the other side, lingual side. And if I end it away from the gingiva, leaving this distance of 4 millimeters to 6 millimeters, the acryl will be very narrow here and it will break. So whenever I'm doing a lower RPD, it should extend with the bilateral or even unilateral saddle areas. I should extend the acryl up to the teeth. Okay? And here we block the marginal gingiva of the teeth using plaster. Make sure that the acrylic doesn't go in them. Below what we call the cervi line. So I want to make sure that my acrylic is extending up to here over the cingulum area of the lower teeth. Why? Because if I make it narrow and away from the gingiva, this will be too small and it will fracture easily. Acrylic cannot withstand such narrow major connectors. It will fracture easily. So I need to extend it over the teeth. Okay? So that's the step, how we extend it. So these are the wax dentures. Once we finish setting the teeth, we finish adding the wax, we will get this situation where we, in the free and saddle, I come down vertically and follow the full extent of the denture. Palatally, I go, don't go beyond the vibrating line. The abutment, I reciprocate it. I go down, I don't need to reach the full extension of the sulcus. I could end even shorter than this. I go back and embrace the abutment. Here we have the two options we told you about. That either I leave a clearance, and that clearance, I leave a clearance, but that clearance should be able to withstand forces with 6 millimeter clearance, or I could do full coverage, and the coverage here that I do, I cover the cingulum of the teeth, up to the cingulum of the teeth with it. Okay? For the lower, I should always extend to the anterior teeth because this acryl needs strength, and I could only get the strength from going in between the teeth. So, over the cingulum of the lower teeth, here we come down vertically, and on the free and saddle we fully extend it as much as possible around the borders. Okay? So this is the wax. So these are the features that you should follow when you do these steps. And now we're going to do an overview over the steps quickly. To begin the procedure, we will do it in the next lab. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In this part of the lab, we are going to speak about preparation of the cast for the setting of the teeth. Okay? So remember that in the first lab, we asked you to do, before wire bending, we wanted you to make the wire bending in a manner that is away from the tooth and away from the blockage material. So that's why we asked you first in the first lab to block out the proximal surfaces. So what you've done is that in between the survey line and the margin of the gingiva, you added plaster. Okay. Between the wire, between the survey line and the margin of the gingiva, you added plaster. Okay. And then using the chisel on the surveyor, I'm doing it here manually, but actually you've done it on the surveyor. I'm just going to do it manually to show you on the demo. So on the surveyor, you went down with the chisel and exposed the survey line, removed excess plaster from so the chisel goes down in a vertical manner, and it removes all of the excess plaster, and you re-expose the survey line that you had. So we call this, because we have done it on the surveyor using this paralleling instrument, which is the chisel, we call this parallel blockout. Why? Because we make it in a way that it's parallel with the path of insertion and removal of the RPD on this denture. Okay? We call it parallel blockout. This type of blockout that is parallel to the path of insertion and removal, we make it in many places that come in contact with the hard denture material. So also the other abutment we do it. We repeat it on the second abutment. And we also put it on the lingual side, because also on the lingual side, the acrylic, solid acrylic, is coming in contact with the teeth. So we call it parallel blockout. Once more, why? Because it's parallel to the path of insertion. So we added the plaster also lingually. This you have done it before the wire bending. We have done the step before the wire bending. Then we came back on the surveyor, and with the chisel going downwards vertically, any excess of this plaster was removed in a parallel manner to this plaster. So both surfaces now, all undercuts that are on the abutment teeth, lingually and proximally, have been blocked out, because we want the acrylic going down from one side. So we have exposed the survey lines. Okay? So these, we call them parallel blockout, because they come in with the surveyor. The chisel comes down from the surveyor in a parallel manner. And so this now space is parallel to this space now. Okay? So the solid denture can come in and go out without interference from the undercuts. So we call it parallel blockout. It's done by the surveyor. But now what we're aiming at is the other blockout that doesn't have to do with the survey line. It has to do with the extension of the acryl. Remember that we're going to extend the acryl over the cingulum of these teeth. So this is not the survey line now. This is the outline of the wax later on that will be added. And we said acrylic is a solid material. So if this solid acrylic comes in between the teeth in this manner that it does here, okay? If the acrylic goes in between teeth, and while inside the teeth it's very close to the marginal gingiva, it will traumatize it. Okay? So we do another type of blockout where we call it arbitrary blockout. We are just simply trying to put the plaster in a way that it covers the marginal gingiva, and it's not done by the surveyor. So blockouts done by the surveyor, we call them parallel blockouts. Arbitrary blockouts are done by hand, and we aim at first of all, the marginal gingiva in these blockouts. If I also have an undercut in the lingual side, I also do this arbitrary blockout. Another question that arises, why am I using plaster? Why not block them with wax, as we have done in the denture procedure? Because I'm replacing all wax in this wax up of the denture by acryl. So if I block these undercuts using wax, the wax will melt down during the wax dewaxing step, and acrylic will come in place. So I'd have as if I have done nothing. So the blockage that I use for the temporary RPD, I use for it plaster and not wax. This will be different from the blockage that I will do in the definitive RPD. You will see later. In the definitive RPD, we will do the blockage on wax because it's not going to be replaced by acryl. And we do it on another cast, a specific cast, which we will duplicate later on. So it's not the cast that will enter into the heat of the furnace or the acrylic processing heat. Okay? So if you look now closely at this cast, I have the parallel blockout on the abutment teeth. I have parallel blockout on the abutment teeth, and I had the arbitrary blockout on the anterior teeth where my acrylic is extending. If it was the upper, I will do it on the palatal side of the upper teeth. Okay? Second step, I want to fix the wires. So I need to make sure the wires are fixed. When you fix the wires using one piece of utility wax, this wire can still move. So I want to put the wire in a manner that it also doesn't move, because at one end I told you it will move. So I'll put a small piece of utility wax over the blockage that I put proximally. Okay, a small piece of utility wax, and then put the wire in it and embed it in it. Of course, the wire will not be touching the tooth and will not be touching the blockage material. So this will help fix the wire into location. Now, no matter what is the way that I fix, anything that I add should keep the buccal surface clear. The buccal surface of the wire should at all times be clean and clear. So after I fix it in location, I'm making sure that the clasp is in the correct manner. It didn't go down and it's not going up away the cervical line. It's still on the midline between the cervical line and the gingiva. And the tip of it is inside the embrasure, so I orient it in the way which I want it in the final RPD. Okay? And now you see that this wax is embedding it. And also I make this wax lower than the contact area because remember I'm going to set teeth now. So I fix all my clasps once more because I told you that the wax at the end of the clasp is not enough. So over the blockage material, the parallel blockage material of plaster, I place a bit of utility wax and then inside I press the clasp inside it to hold it in exact place where I want it. Okay? So now the wire is in the exact place. The final one, and I expose the contact area. I have to expose the contact area to make space for the second tooth. And my final addition. So now the wires are firmly attached to the teeth in the correct manner that I want them, and they're not moving around. I'm preserving them proximally. Okay, last piece of wax. Fix the wire in place. Make sure it's in the correct location with the tooth, and it's now fixed in place. So all wires are fixed. Now I begin adding in teeth. So remember, I'm going to set the teeth using acrylic teeth. You will take them from inside, and I need to set the artificial tooth in contact with the natural tooth. Okay, so this is the artificial tooth. I'm going to fix it in here. And for this purpose, I'm going to use the correct size of the teeth, I'm going to use wax down here. So